both John and Barry asked me to take this on, and I said, that's great, I do a lot of teaching. I don't do an awful lot of performing. But as I look around the room, I get a second chance to kind of say, like I said at the retreat, I think I know most of you, and it's really nice to be able to speak in front of you. And so instead of making this a statement, I'm going to make it a question. Is teaching the same as performing live in front of an audience? And I thought I'd start off by showing you some of my own recent performances by me. These are the teaching performances. So in the past year or so, I've been asked to do a lot of different guest lectures. And so this is one I put together for Bill LaCourse's Chem 102 Honors. Let's see which button here. I gave a presentation at Clemson at their REU program. I want you to pay attention to the title there, right? Because I used the same title when I gave a guest lecture at Johns Hopkins for one of my buddies' biomechanics class. And this kind of gets me into the concept of performance, because if you think about what an artistic performer does, a musician or an actor, they are essentially giving the same performance over and over and over and over. And part of the difficulty I feel in performing is keeping it fresh each time you do it. So we'll come back to that in a second. Last January, I was asked by the Department of Education to give a talk about the GAN, the Graduate Assistantships in Areas of National Need grants. I gave a talk, I did some stuff for the Johns Hopkins orthopedic residents, but then I decided to change the title. I didn't think that was, so I was actually going over some mechanics and materials that the residents need to pass their boards. And so as a compromise, I used my less formal sort of name. Yeah, and you'll see that my name kind of changes with every lecture, and there's no reason for it. It's just what I think of or whatever slide I happen to have when I'm creating that particular lecture. I gave a presentation to the students that were giving oral presentations at ERCAT. I've done this for, I don't know, for about 8, 12, 15 years, something like that, and try to give them some idea of how to give an oral presentation. I gave a really kind of fun presentation in my Chinese class. I take Chinese on the side here. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I was able to talk about, from my personal experience, some things in Chinese culture. And just a week and a half or so ago, I had my colleagues Jenny Leach and Adele Kirk from our UMBC come to the Society for Biomaterials in San Antonio. And I have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. It's been over a week, so I don't have the swine flu. All right. And then where I maybe have honed whatever performing skills I have in giving lectures has been in this particular University 301, Introduction to the Honors University. And I also recently gave a version of this to some middle school students who came. And the reason I say that, let me go back to this slide for a second, is when I give the Honors 301 or the Honors 101 lectures for the new students coming in, I give 4 hour and 15-minute lectures in a row. And it's the same bloody lecture every time. And then I come back and I do it again the next day. And I don't know if you've ever given 5 hours of lecture straight. Anybody ever do that? No, it's pretty grueling, all right? It's not an easy thing to do. And the question I always have is, oh my God, here's the 4th lecture coming up. How am I going to keep this fresh for this new group of people coming in? And that's one of the aspects of performance I do want to talk about. So I want to give you a little bit of my musical history, all right? I started playing violin in the 2nd grade at a place called Ithaca Talent Education, and Ithaca College is a well-known music school in beautiful Ithaca, New York, and it was kind of Suzuki-ish, right? My teachers were some of the first people to embrace the Suzuki method in the United States. They're the Sanford and Joan Runing, and they had a school there. They were faculty at Ithaca College. But I, like sort of a scientist engineer, needed to know what those little black things on the page were. So my father, who was an accordion player, come on in, plenty of seats. My father, who's an accordion player, taught me how to read music. So I kind of did both. And then, and you know what was interesting about this is I never thought about my own musical history. I never thought about where I came from and how I learned to do any of this sort of stuff. And so it turns out that in about 8th grade, I switched over to the viola. And for those of you who don't know, the viola is like just a big brother of the violin. It plays in a lower register, but it has its own set of issues and problems, and if you know any violinists or any musicians, they love telling viola jokes because the idea is that violists are not as skilled players as violinists, or at least that's what the violinists would like you to believe. So in fact, I really only studied violin for 6 years, from my 2nd grade to the 8th grade. In high school, I started fooling around with all sorts of stuff, learning saxophone and bassoon, and I got into jazz band playing there. But I didn't really continue that after high school. But when I graduated from college, I had a job outside of Philadelphia, and I found this place called Britain's Folk Studio. And Britain's Folk Studio offered fiddle lessons by a fellow named Johnny Cunningham. And if you know anything about Irish or Scottish fiddle, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, Johnny Cunningham was a real force in that field. He played with a group called Silly Wizard for many years. He went off on his own. And then I'd say 5, 6, 7 years back, he toured with 2 other fiddlers. They were called the Irish, or the Celtic Fiddle Festival. That's what they were. It was Johnny Cunningham, Kevin Burke, and Christian Lemaitre. And Johnny is a Scottish fiddler, was. He passed away a few years ago. Kevin Burke is an Irish fiddler, and Christian Lemaitre is a Cape Breton fiddler from Canada. And Johnny taught me how to play the Irish fiddle. And I was really privileged to be able to really learn from one of the best. And then I went back to grad school at Cornell, fell in with a bunch of musicians, and you know how they are. You know, Friday nights, Saturday nights, we're up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning, just playing music. I mean, there's nothing like it, just to be able to get it with a bunch of your friends in a living room, on a porch, if the police don't come, and play whatever. And every time we do it, we'd end with a rendition of "Friend of the Devil" by the Grateful Dead. We'd go through everything we could. And I learned to play guitar doing that, sort of on my own. And then I became the music leader and the music director for the Cornell Catholic Community. That's what the CCC here stands for. And I did that for many years. And then when I later went on to get my PhD at Penn, I also worked with the Penn Catholic Community. But there's something in Philadelphia called the Doctors Orchestra. And it was mostly doctors, as you can understand. And we'd get together and we'd play real concerts. And I was playing viola in the Doctors Orchestra. And I got back into sort of playing classical music again. And then when I came to UMBC, I didn't really have a musical home. They kept calling me from Philadelphia to come back and play, but the commute was just too much. And so my girlfriend at the time, who turned into my wife of the present, was singing in a women's chorus, and the conductor of the women's chorus, and this women's chorus still exists, and they had a beautiful concert last Saturday. She said her conductor also conducts the Columbia Orchestra. Would I like to join? I said, yeah, that would be great. And so my good friend now, Annette Schwann, called me up and said, I understand you want to play in the orchestra. I said, what do you play? I said, I play viola. Now, if you know anything about orchestras, or if you've heard anything about orchestras, they can never find enough viola players. They always have to convert violinists. There's just not enough of us around. And so I'm a shoo-in here. No audition, don't have to worry. I'm going to go in the orchestra. She said, we have enough viola players. The only time I've ever heard this in my life. And she said, but can you play first violin? And I said, oh yeah, that's got to be easy. And the first piece that they threw me into is something we're going to talk about right now, Beethoven's 7th Symphony. And I said, what the heck am I doing playing violin again? And I was really out of my league at that point. But I kept at it. I kept hacking at it. And in around 2000, the conductor, Kathy Ferguson of the orchestra, and I were talking, and she said, why don't we take lessons? I said, you bet, let's take some lessons. And she really taught me how to play the violin. I learned how to play the violin again, like it really should be played. Unfortunately, you're not going to hear that today, but I'm a little out of practice, but we'll try to see what we can get. So, I went to my favorite source, and I have to see my buddy Jay Fryman here, who really introduced me to the Oxford English Dictionary online. I love using this now when I have to deal with words because you get so much stuff from the Oxford English Dictionary. And I said, let's look at the concept of performance. What do they say about it? And I don't know how well you can read it, but the first definition here is the accomplishment or carrying out of something commanded or undertaken, the doing of an action or an operation. And we talk about our own performance in that context. How well do we do something? And I was talking to a physician friend of mine, and I said, yeah, don't we talk about how well one performs in the operating room, how we performed in class? And he said, yeah, and remember, back in the day, the operating room was called the operating theater because people were actually watching the physicians do their stuff, all right? And so now if we come down to, let's see, this is a weird one, number 2, a set of fur trimmings called a performance. Anybody knew that definition? I didn't. So, but here we go. Number 4, the action of performing a play, piece of music, ceremony, etc., execution, interpretation. So we have not really conflicting, but different definitions of performance. And how we define the word and how we bring it into our own teaching may have an effect on the outcome of the teaching. And when I was first asked to do this, I thought, okay, what do I know about performance? What are the key ingredients to any performance? And the first one I came up with was the concept of control. A performer needs to be in control of their output, whether it's theater, whether it is playing a musical instrument, whether it is going up in front of a classroom. You need to have control. And I started thinking about this concept, control, control, control. What does it mean? How am I going to express it? And I was walking around campus and saw the preacher man down at the University Center. You know him? I don't know his name. But a second aspect of performance came to me. I was saved, brothers and sisters. You got to have faith. You got to have faith to be a performer. And I was looking at this guy, right? And he was out there drawing a picture, and talking to who? Nobody. But he had such absolute faith in what he was doing. It didn't bother him. It didn't bother him that he was going to be heckled. It didn't bother him that people were going to throw slings and arrows at him, right? He had this incredible internal faith that what he was doing was the right thing. And I said, my God. Well, okay. I said, goodness gracious, right? What if we, as teachers, as administrators, as parents, could have that absolute faith in what we do? How much better would our performance be? And so the second aspect of performing, I may talk about a little bit later, is faith, right? And this is a slide I use when I'm showing the ERCAD students, the undergraduates, and I say, what is the purpose of an oral presentation, a talk, a classroom, if you will? Well, first thing is it brings the originator, us, in contact with the target audience, you guys, right? I'm able to succinctly transfer information. I don't care what your discipline is, but when you have an hour to present some information, you really have to figure out what's important and what's not, right? It allows for interaction. You guys are out there, and I'm going to have to get you talking to me a little bit later. But the most important thing about giving a presentation like this, got you, didn't I? Gives control to the speaker, to me, all right? To you as teachers. There's an amazing amount of control we have over what happens in our classroom. So let me demonstrate. John, would you just stand up? Is there room to stand up? Okay, would you turn around and wave? John Fritz, everybody. Please sit down. And why did he do that? Because he's nice. Because I asked him to, right? I'm in front of the classroom, and I asked him to do that, and he complied without really even thinking about why. And when you're talking to undergraduates and you show them this, it kind of dawns on them what power the person in front of the classroom really has over what is going on in the heads of the students in the classroom. And so how can we use that element of control to become better teachers, better performers? Now, I also wanted to start off with a few little preliminary comments about our jobs. And one of the questions you may be asking is, do I advocate that we need to be entertaining students in front of the classroom? Is that something we as teachers should be doing? And I say no. I don't think that's our job. It might be fun. We might enjoy it. But I don't think at this stage we have mature students that are paying a lot of money. They're not coming to be entertained. They're coming to be educated. Right? Are we here to motivate students? Well, that's an object of contention. Maybe. I say probably yes. But again, we could have a lunch discussion. We could argue for quite a while that, no, these students that are coming to UMBC are smart. They should be self-motivated. They should want to do what they're doing. But then we get to the point, do we engage students who are already motivated? And here I think the answer is yes. That part of our job, or a large part of our job, is to engage students who are motivated to learn, who really want to learn. And so this talk is not going to be about what is our job in educating students, but how can we maybe look at the elements of performance and bring them into our teaching. All right? So every time I talk about teaching or I give a lecture, I talk about a few things. I talk about goals, I talk about opportunities, challenges, and lately I've been talking about fun. I don't really get into that as much as I should, but let's take goals, for example, right? I love this little cartoon that I got from Pearls Before Swine, and the little kid's saying, "Hey, Dad, can you take me to GameStop? I want to get a game for my DS." And the dad says, "No, me glue head to wall." And the son says, "Why did you do that?" And he says, "No, personal goal." And says, "Maybe I'll just ask Mom. Remember, son, always set goals in life." I just thought that was the funniest cartoon ever. And, you know, I have some personal goals. I have some big goals, right? My three that are on the top of my head right now is I want to dig up a Triceratops skeleton. I want to sing backup for the Rolling Stones on Sympathy for the Devil, you know, the doo-doo part. And then I want to play with the BSO, maybe just in the back of the second violins, one concert, one lousy concert once in my life, be on that stage with the BSO. However, barring that, I have some more personal goals. And these are my daughters. This picture was taken in 2005. And many of you know Audrey and Eliza. They've actually switched hairstyles now. Eliza has shorter hair. And behind me there is what? You guys recognize that? Who can tell me what that is? That's in Yosemite. That's Half Dome, right? People climb up to the top of Half Dome. I've climbed to the top of Half Dome, not this way, but you can actually go around and climb up back there. And it's pretty arduous climb. And see, my goal in life right now is when my little girls in 10 years say, "Daddy, we want to climb up Half Dome like you're always telling us," I want to be in shape to do that. Right? I want to be physically able to do that. I'm going to be old in 10 years. I mean, a lot older than I am now. Well, 10 years older, as a matter of fact. So I just turned 50. So, you know, we're talking about being 60 plus years old and being able to go vertically up about a mile, but it's about a 17 or 18 mile round trip. So that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to in my life. And what have I done with this particular picture and this particular story? I set a goal, but who am I talking about? My family, right? What I've done, in a sense, is I've drawn you in to my life. I've given you a little snapshot into my personal life and to who I am. Not giving away too much. You know, some teachers want to be completely separate from the students. Others want, you know, to be drinking buddies with them or not, or whatnot. But there's a great movie several years ago called House of Games, I think it was called. About con men. It's about a woman who was a psychologist or psychiatrist, and she was doing a story on con men, and she found a con man and was interviewing him, and he said, the idea behind a confidence game is not to win the confidence of the person you're trying to bilk, but to give them your confidence. Because he said, when you give them your confidence, when you do something so they believe in you, then you, in return, can have a lot of control over how they act. So in sharing part of my personal life, in a sense, I've given you my confidence. I say, you know what, here it is. I'm a real person. Come join me in my life's travels. And maybe as a student you would think, hey, that's not such a bad guy. He's a real life person. He's got kids himself. So the main topics we're talking about are control and faith. I'm going to talk a little bit about control now. And the question is, where do we start? So if you are thinking about becoming a performer or becoming a teacher, where do you start learning about control? And it comes back to the question, how do you get to Carnegie Hall from here? And the answer is practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. The old joke. So what about practice, all right? What can I control when I practice with my violins? Well, I'm going to introduce you to some of my practice partners, all right? These guys and I have been around together a long time. This is my violin. I can't even remember how long I've had it. But, my name is Shlomo. But you get used to playing a particular instrument, and it really becomes sort of an extension of you, all right? I'll show you some of these other guys a little bit later. We'll just have a little fun with that. But you need an instrument to play, obviously. And I talk about the FPUs, which I call the Fundamental Practice Unit I just made that up. Don't worry, it's not in the literature anywhere. What are the fundamental practice units when anybody plays an instrument? It's scales, right? You play scale after scale after scale, all right? And you can play scales kind of low and slow. Faster. You can play them high and fast. Play them in 1 octave scales on 1 string. A little out of tune there. We play scale after scale after scale after scale. And it's just something to build your fingers, to build your ability to interact with the instrument. So I thought, well, oh yeah, I forgot about the disclaimer. I should do this. You guys know who Hannah Montana is, right? You know, the teen idol, right? Yeah, okay. My daughter gave me this. She said, show them this. You know, she's got this dual life. She's Miley Stewart, you know, cute little high school girl during the daytime, and at night she's a rock star. Well, let me assure you that I'm neither Josh Bell nor Hillary Hahn in disguise coming to give this to you. So I don't want you to think you're going to get a real concert for this. All right. But what are these scales, right? So students want to know about the real world, right? They're doing all sorts of homeworks, same as a musician playing all sorts of scales. How does that apply to the real world? And in the sense, what good are doing all these scales? You don't go to a concert hall to hear scales, right? You go to a concert hall to hear what? The symphony, to hear Josh Bell playing Sibelius or something. But the question is that that's not true, all right? And no, I don't want to do this. Give me a second. So I want you to listen to this little bit of Beethoven's 7th Symphony. Well, no, I'm going to play some scales for you first, all right? Play these other scales for you, and see if you can follow along with me, all right? Very innocent scales. They're actually modal scales, which means they don't start on the do of the scale. They actually start on the re or the mi, it's like playing a C scale, but shifted, not starting on the C. But they're just plain scales. There's nothing tricky about them. But listen to this. Oh, but he throws in some other notes. Listen. Can you hear that? One more. Wait for it. The scale, nothing more. And there are 4 notes that he's playing under that. Listen, scales. There's another one. And Beethoven manages to turn these simple scales into some of the most magnificent music ever. It gives me chills when I listen to it. And I also had the chance to play this a couple weeks ago with the Columbia Orchestra, and being in the middle of that kind of music, I mean, really on the stage is incredible. But I want you to hear another part here. And I have sort of primitive audio-visual stuff. Paul, we got to work on that. Okay. Here it is again in the bass, but the scales go even higher, and he's trading it off to different instruments. Now Beethoven does something really tricky here. Check this out. I love this part. 3. I'm not sophisticated enough to put it in the PowerPoint. He takes the symphony and breaks it down to 1 note. Same note, hasn't changed a thing. For about 30 seconds, we've been listening to the same note. And I start thinking, wow, that is just amazing. So in the hands of somebody like Beethoven, a single note passed back and forth in the orchestra can give meaning to that note that you wouldn't have expected. And so you say, oh, a note, a scale, what's better? Let's put them together. And see, Beethoven gets really tricky here. Let's see if I can find it for you. So this is a scale. Here's a note. Scale. It's got a little rhythm in there. Listen to that note just being played. Those notes are some of the most important notes in the symphony. It's a single note he holds. And now he passes this theme around a little bit later and back to one note. Same note. And listen to that brass play that note out. One note. Simple stuff. And so I thought, you know, if Beethoven can do this, let's see, with scales and a word, or and a note, what can we do, you know, as teachers? What can I control? I can control a note, right? I have absolute control over any note, hopefully, that I play on the violin. I can play it loud, scrubby, I can play it soft, fast, slow, right? All that comes from this hand, by the way. Most violins are played with the bow hand. This hand is for being in tune, which is good to be, but you control everything here. And I didn't realize this until I started taking lessons again. You learn how to draw your name and script and everything with your bow. But if I can control a note, what can we control in the lecture? A word, right? What word could you start a lecture with and build an entire lecture just based on that word? Marilyn, give me a word that you could use for a lecture. One word. Assessment. Oh, yeah, you could. Hi, Jun, one word. What? One word that you could build a lecture upon.
Why?
Why? Good word. Jamie, one word.
Learn.
Learn. Anne. Bridge. Oh, yeah, bridges are good, right? Who else? Nagaraj, one word.
Stats.
Beach.
Stats. You know, in my area, I thought materials, failure, not of the students, mechanics, biology, right? Health, right? We have control, and we can't underestimate the power of a single word to lead to motivating the students. I mean, if Beethoven can do it with a single note, our job as teachers and teaching performers is to think about the power of a word and what can we do with that, all right? So in teaching, right, what can we control? Well, we said we can control the word, but what are our FPUs, these fundamental practice units in teaching? And this should probably be something for discussion, but since we have a little bit of time limit, I just came up with a few that I thought might be interesting. We can control the mechanics of giving a lecture, right? We can do things like, you know, don't talk to the board. Everybody knows we don't talk up here to the board, right? What else can we do? We can eliminate noise. Well, how do you eliminate noise? Well, first of all, you don't jingle your keys around, right? You use words the students can understand. We can practice our delivery. We can work on trying to understand what the students are going to understand. How do we emphasize a particular word or a particular phrase? How do we make the students know that certain things are important? And we can control the content. Everybody giving a lecture has absolute control over the content of that particular lecture, right? And then finally, I think the big thing that we need to think about controlling is our fundamental knowledge of the subject. We have control over what we do outside of the classroom, and whether we take the time to understand the material more deeply than the students need to know it, to deliver it, or not, can make, I believe, the difference between a good lecture and a bad lecture. So knowing what's going on, I think, and practicing not the scales, but just understanding the fundamentals of our own field. And I think I know all the lecturers that I know do that. And in fact, that's one of the claims we make, that a research university can provide the students perhaps with a better education than a non-research university. That may or may not be true. We could argue that point. But the fact that as a research university, we are creating new knowledge in our fields, and we can bring that new knowledge into the classroom right away and give the students a more timely experience. And the other thing that I like to do, and I sort of have an easy job of it, but I'm sort of fascinated by this whole world, right? I find it hard to specialize. I'm really fascinated by the whole world. And I'm pretty lucky because I teach a material science class. And everything is made out of material, right? Everything you touch, everything you look at, I can pick up anything and bring it into class and tell a story about it. But I think you can do the same thing in almost any discipline. It might be harder in some ways. But how do you bring something you just heard on the radio that morning driving into work to the classroom? Or you pick up one of your kids' toys at home or a friend's kid toy and you say, I'm going to turn this into a lecture, right? I'm going to turn this into something special. And also, how do I expand my knowledge and take my students outside of my own sort of comfort level, my own area of expertise? And you'll see you have your little do not open packets right in front of you. Now's the time to open them. Right? And what I do, and it's kind of fun, is I bring some poetry into my classroom. Now you say, okay, Barry said, oh, he's a mechanical engineer. What is he doing? I'm a biomedical engineer. What am I doing bringing poetry into the classroom? Well, here's two poems. One of them in California on the left side is by our colleague, Robert DeLudy. And he's got several books of poems. And I love this because last year, and Ricardo was in this class, I found this poem and I said, you got to read it. It's called In California. Tourists from Taiwan visiting a suburban megamall study the registry. 67 fast food stalls, 56 clothing boutiques, 32 electronic centers, 21 furniture dealers, 19 shoe stores, 11 jewelers, 8 bakeries, 7 hair salons, 6 ice cream parlors, 5 chocolatiers, 3 florists, 2 locksmiths, and 1 bookstore. And you say, well, how do I make that connection with my class? I said, well, don't we live in a material world? Haven't you heard that in popular music? And we talk about how everything is material. Well, heck, I'm teaching a material science class. We've got to talk about a material world. But isn't it sort of a sad commentary that that is more important than the life of our mind and education? The second poem is from this is an awesome book of poems called Cemetery Nights by Stephen Dobbins. And I found out about him because Stephen King used some of his poems in some of his books. This one's called Pursuit, and this is kind of neat. Each thing I do, I rush through so I can do something else. I don't know if I've ever heard a better opening line to a poem. How many times have you felt like that, right? In such a way do the days pass, a blend of stock car racing and the never-ending building of a Gothic cathedral. Through the windows of my speeding car, I see all that I love fall away. Books unread, jokes untold, landscapes unvisited. And why? What treasure do I expect from my future? Rather, it is the conclusion of childhood loping behind me, the chaos of the mind, the failure chipping away at each success. Glancing over my shoulder, I see its shape and so move forward, as someone in the woods at night might hear the sound of approaching feet and stop to listen. Then, instead of silence, he hears some creature trying to be silent. Ooh, isn't that like the creepiest little image? You know? What else can he do but run, rushing blindly down the path, stumbling, struck in the face by sticks, and the other ever closer, not really hurrying or out of breath, teasing its kill. And when I bring this to the students, I say, think about this. What are you guys doing with your life, right? Each thing I do, I rush through so I can go on to do something else. And it takes me, a minute out of my lecture time to deliver something like that to my students, right? So these are some of the fundamental practice units that I like to consider. What can I bring to my students that's outside of the realm of the subject matter? And how can I relate it to what they're doing? And it also gives me a chance to read poems, which is kind of cool, and perform them, right? So what else can I control? Well, there's nothing wrong with a little theatrics, all right? And by little theatrics, I mean when I'm doing some lectures, I'm a stamp collector, and so I like to bring some of this stuff in to the lecture. Now here's actually what we call a cover in stamp collecting, And it was actually sent in 1877. Now, I don't know if many of you know this, but I do work on heart disease. And one of the things I'm interested in working on is why arteries get sick, and when they get sick, what happens to them, basically. So I found this letter. It's a longer story, but I won't give it to you all at once. And if you look at this letter, you can see that it was written in 1877, not 1977. That was pretty obvious from the postage. And he writes in this letter that Sally, my beloved wife, departed this life of diseases of the heart. Right? Flag. I'm interested in heart disease. And you look at page 2, and remember, this is 1877. And in 1877, he writes that the love of my orphan boy is ... Well, in 1877, how old would a young man be before they were considered independent and moved out of the house? 14, 16, maybe? So if we're talking about a boy that lost his mother and his father considered to be orphan, I'm speculating that he was probably younger than 16, a young kid. How old was his mother when she had the baby? In 1877, now this is an educated family. What do you think, Marilyn? 20? 20? And if the boy was conservatively 16, she was 36 years old when she died of diseases of the heart. That was 132 years ago. And still today, heart disease is the #1 killer of people in the United States. Now, to me, that's motivation to study that. But I got a little theater in there, right? A little bit of theater. I also like to use this when I'm talking to undergraduates. I collect stamps, and the shorter version is, look at this, stamp from Belgium, 1894. We usually think of old things as being valuable. These stamps, I'll sell them to you for $1. They're pretty worthless, right? I call them, in fact, the stamps of no real consequence. Okay. So then I ask the students, think about your value. What are you going to be doing in, 5, 10, 20 years from now? Show these stamps. On the other hand, these stamps are probably worth somewhere between $800 and $1,000 for the bunch. All right? And why? Why are these lousy pieces of paper worth that much money? And the point is that they're well made, and there weren't very many of them. They're rare. So as a student, what do you want to be? Of no consequence, or do you want to be the one that's rare and that people are looking for? And it's pretty effective when I bring that to the students. And I also think about what I learned from Winsor McCay. You know who Winsor McCay was in Gertie the Dinosaur? Some of you. Winsor McCay was probably one of the first it was considered the first animated film. And this is Gertie, and she moves around. But what Winsor McCay did was he timed the animation so that he could go up on stage and interact with his dinosaur and ask her questions, and she would, count to 3 or whatever. And then he would actually go behind the screen and enter into his own animation. And so we can do this. This is not so hard. And as an example, I talk about my lab, and I call it the branches of the limb, the Laboratory for Implantable Materials in Biomechanics. And all I need to do is start the PowerPoint and say, I look at engineered materials and natural or biological materials. On the engineered materials side, I'm interested in surface modification, I'm interested in wear, and I'm interested in fracture of things that go in the body because you don't want them to break. On the natural biological material side, I'm interested in mechanics, disease, and microstructure, and tissue fracture. And I've practiced that. I've timed it. So I've been able to bring the animation together to sort of look like I'm interacting with it without doing anything. A little bit of theater never hurts to bring the point across. It takes a while to make these slides. If you've ever done one like that, you can waste a lot of time doing it. But it's kind of fun. So the other thing I like to look at in teaching, both in teaching and performing, is where are our contrasts? Where do we see differences, right? And like violins, students are all different. And now I want to kind of introduce you to some of these fiddles over here. So this is the one I play a lot. And I just wanted to hear the sound, and I'm trying to think about what the heck I should play. Anyway, I'll come up with something, but pay attention to the sound and see what you think of the sound of the violin, not my poor excuse for playing. So it's got kind of a high, sort of a clearish tone. This is my wife's violin. It's a lot older and a lot more valuable. It's got a whole different sound to it. There we go. See the difference? It's sort of a woodier tone, a darker tone. Now this little beauty I picked up, it's got this, hear that kind of noise rattling around in there? I'll tell you what that is a little bit later. But it's got a whole different sound to it, all right? So 3 violins, completely different. And if these guys are different, why would we expect students to learn the same way? I can't play these the same way. It's kind of hard once you've played this guy to make these guys sound the way I want without 15 or 20 minutes of warm-up. All right, that's why, at least that's my story, about why it doesn't sound so good. But here's another little beauty that my wife bought for me. This is really cool. Packs in a 3-inch PVC case. It's a little travel violin that a craftsman made. And it's kind of hard to play this way, but you can take it on vacation, stick it in your suitcase, right? And it just doesn't have a good chin rest, but. You can barely hear it, right? It's a practice violin. I can hear it pretty well up here. All right? Now, we get funky. All right? This is my toy. Get some electric violins, and these guys sound really different. And I can change the way it sounds by playing with the amp. So I've got a lot of control over this, except it's basically a piece of crap electric violin. I just bought it for the fun of it, right? Now this one, and I'm glad Jamie's here, this is on sort of extended loan from my student Jamie back there. This is a lot nicer violin. And
I would have brought my Yamaha if you asked me to.
can you hear it over there? Is it coming out of the amp? Doesn't sound quite right. Shoot. You know, I forgot to bring, I was going to show you a DVD of Cirque du Soleil to show you an example of control, but I forgot it at home. Just give me a quick second with this violin. We don't have much time. We'll be right back. You hold. All right, that's what I'm talking about. You cannot play a black electric violin in button down. All right, now I feel better. Whoops. Give me that chord. Now we're going to see what we can really do here. Mine doesn't go to 11. Woo! Feedback. But you can really get some noise out of this, right? There you go. So, sorry about that for the people that were close. But see, it just doesn't make sense to play this kind of as a concert violin, right? And so part of the performance and part of the theater is to make yourself look the part, all right? So I love this shirt, too. I just had to have an excuse. Tax deduction. We're talking tax. So is the amp, since I just bought that. But these violins are all different. Right, each one is going to have its own particular quirks, its own particular style. It's going to depend on the strings. And when we look at students, we know that they're all going to be different. They're all going to have their own sort of quirks, their own learning abilities, their own learning methods. And I think part of what we can bring from performance to the classroom is the understanding that not everybody's going to learn the same way. Right? Not all violins are going to be played the same way. All right, let's see. Hello, there we go. So, what else can we bring from the performance venue to the classroom. And the other part of control is passion, all right? And I'm going to give this a try. I should probably turn back into my professorial self, but I can play a tune, right? I can play a tune, play the notes completely right, but not really put anything into it, all right? Might sound something like this. I could go on and on and on like that. Playing the notes, actually, surprisingly well for me. But there's nothing other than the notes going forth. And that's not what the composer wanted, and that's not how you make it exciting. In fact, if you look at Mendelssohn's front page, he says, molto appassionato, with much passion, all right? So let me see if I can bring a little passion into it and see if you can see the difference, all right? And you put a little bit more into it, now it sounds like music. I haven't practiced that much. But the idea is that I can put something of myself into that piece of music, and it will sound a lot different than just, it's like reading a book without putting inflection into your words, right? So we can bring passion into our lectures. The other thing we can bring is this element of faith that I talked about a while ago, all right? It took a great deal for me to actually stand up in front of you guys to play the violin, right? I don't normally do that. And to play unaccompanied is very difficult because you don't have anybody else to blame, all right? If you're playing in an orchestra, you look at your stand partner when you make a mistake, and you go, what is that guy playing over there? But when there's nobody else, it's just me, all right? And pretty much, if I were going to do a performance, and I have done some performances, I would be warming up 2 or 3 hours in advance, playing the music. But I'm going to take a leap of faith again, try to perform something for you. And this is something I did with my wife's choir last year. They asked me to play accompany them on one piece, and then the conductor said, well, would you do some Irish fiddling in the middle of the concert to kind of give the ladies a rest? And I said, sure, I would be happy to do this. Not really, but so the pieces you're going to hear are all pieces that I learned from this guy, Johnny Cunningham. And the first piece is called the Green, Green Grass of Home. It's an air, a slow air. And from then, I'm going to move into 2 what they call planksties of Ireland. These are sort of anthems for the families. Like in Scotland, they'll have tartans for the kilts. In Ireland, they have their own songs. And finally, move into a piece called Pigtown, which you probably recognize as being part of Charles Ives' Second Symphony. Yeah, right. But Charles Ives used a lot of American music, and this came over from Ireland through Appalachia, and he picked it up. And that's kind of why I chose it. So let's give this a try. I'm going to take a leap of faith. You just pretend that Josh Bell is up here for a while. And no matter how it sounds, pretend it sounds good, all right? I love playing the Irish music. I always tell the joke that when my grandfather came over from the old country, he dropped the O in front of our name. It used to be O Topoleski. And thank you for letting me do that. Actually, two of the greatest performances I've ever had. One was with this little guy, this little violin, when my friend in Chicago, his daughter, 2 years ago, she's taken Suzuki. So I brought this and we played some duets together. And then on St. Patrick's Day, I got to play some jigs and reels for my daughter's kindergarten class. And the kids were all up and dancing in the aisles. It was great. So, whoops, I didn't want to do that yet. See, bad performance. So, faith, that was the other aspect of faith that I wanted to talk about, was that the concept that we need to know our material well enough to be able to say we don't know, right? To be able to say, you know what, I don't know the answer, but I have faith that I can find the answer, right? Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, right? This is my shtick, and for the rest of your lives, right? Movies are great. You can bring movies into the mix at any time. But then, what are we doing for the rest of our lives, right? Here we are. We work to get better, right? We practice. We look at fundamental knowledge as lecturers, as performers, as administrators, right? Continue to develop our control over our subject matter, whether it's the fiddle, whether it's what we do every day. We got to maintain our passion. And I think that's one of the best ways to understand how to bring elements of performance into the classroom and keep the faith. You've got to have faith in ourselves to be able to deliver these kinds of lectures. And so I go back to my original concept, teaching as performance, the original question. And I think the answer is absolutely yes. We can, as teachers, also be performers, but not necessarily just to entertain our students, but to bring parts of our lives and parts of our expertise into the classroom to help motivate the students. And, that's the date. I want to thank you and acknowledge some people that supported and inspired me. First, my family, Marcy, Eliza, and Audrey. My parents, Jan and Leonard. My dad is a great lecturer. He was a great lecturer at Cornell for years. I used to go to his classes. All my violin teachers, including Dr. Suzuki. And the story is that Dr. Suzuki came to Ithaca College way back in the day. I think I must have been, 9 years old. It turns out my wife was at the same Suzuki conference. We were together like 45 years ago in this, 43 years ago in this gym at Ithaca College. I've got to see if we have pictures. All you here at UMBC, my colleagues, friends, students who've come, all of my musical comrades through the years, Cirque du Soleil, which I forgot to show you the video, but it was really cool. I'll show it to you later. Who can get by without Beethoven? And why not Bach, Brahms, Sibelius, Tan Dun, Villalobos, and of course, might as well Jimi Hendrix, Billie Holiday, The Doors, The Cars, etc. And I want to say thank you and hope to see you on the top someday. Any questions, discussion, huh? I know I took all the time, sorry.
So if, I don't know if you've seen the Michael Wesch video, A Vision of Students Today. It's the #1 YouTube hit. Kansas State University professor of anthropology opens the scene if students learn what they do, and then he has a picture of a lecture hall. What are they learning here? How do you square the control of performance with some of the push that you see now about active collaborative learning and students participating? Does that take away your control?
No, that's a good question. And in fact, I think anytime you're interacting with students, and when I'm saying control, for the most part, I mean control over what I can do, not necessarily controlling the students. And for example, I teach an honors section of either what we call a fundamental strength and materials course or material science course. And what I do is I just take the students on walkabouts around campus. And we talk about the topic of the week, whatever it is. And it's a small group, usually 7 or 8 students, and I come to something like a lamppost. And now it's my job, and this is where the control comes in, to relate that lamppost and the study of, say, the stresses or the failure of that lamppost to what we talked about in class. And then I have a way of segueing that into an assignment for the students. And I think that to do it right, I have to be in control of what I'm doing. I have to plan this ahead. See, the students don't know that. That I've sort of rehearsed this in my mind, and I've done it before, that this is what we're going to do, but to the students it's going to look spontaneous. And a lot of it is spontaneous, but you make it look like, oh, by the way, oh, well, gee, we just happened to come upon this lamppost here, and so the students are actually physically doing something. They're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they would be doing in industry, and I tie it in that way. So, and I think, we can do that with any subject if you want to wander around outside poetry, economics, literature, emergency health, whatever it is, you can find a way to bring the element of controlling your performance as an instructor into their practical classroom. Ellen?
Yeah, I think that your presentation was an exemplification of control, because you did this. You came and you gave the whole lecture, and we participated very, very minimally. You asked one person to turn around. You had almost no interaction with the class. I don't know, to me, there's a lot of teaching as performance that can be seen as improv drama. I'm not so into control. I'm very much into spontaneity. I think that a lot of great theater has a lot of improvisation. And I think being able to cede control, being able not just to have faith, but to question faith, being able to do things, suddenly come up with something and change your direction, because the kids are pushing you in another direction, is all part of great theater and part of great performance. So, and kind of knowing you a little bit and working with you a little bit in the Honors College, I kind of don't really believe, I kind of think that you're a whole lot more spontaneous than you're presenting it in this lecture.
Well,
and I don't know if that's true or not, but I just want to put that on the table, because I think that great teaching as performance is more, it has a lot more than control and faith. It's a lot of other things too.
Oh, I agree.
I think you
But
exemplify.
thank you. But to tell you about this lecture, it wasn't in control. I had never done this before, and I was really kind of improvising the whole way. But that's the secret. You thought I was sweating bullets up here because I didn't know how it was going to come out. But the idea is what I'm trying to convey more is that even when you do improv, the good people in improv theater, they just don't show up off the street and all of a sudden, boom, they can do improv, right? They have, in a sense, worked on their craft, whether it's the ability to do improv either by practicing written theater or by doing lots and lots and lots of improv, to the point where now it becomes sort of a second nature to them. But they still have an element of control. They're not randomly doing things. I mean, their thought process, I believe, is just faster. It's happening boom, 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 boom.
But don't you think that a lot of the control comes from what you said when you talked about this being a research university? All of us have studied for years. We've written books, we've written treatises, we know our subjects. So when we get up there, we've sort of earned the right to be spontaneous, because we know our subjects by now, hopefully. And that's the thing. But I think encouraging the students also to be part of this drama is extremely important in the classroom.
I agree.
This is a collaboration. I think the word communication wasn't really mentioned, but that's also part of it. A great performer only does a great performance when the audience is really with you. And that's it's a magic that goes on in that interaction.
That's a good point. There's the element of communication, which you're right, I didn't bring that in. But part of, I think it comes into the concept of, when I say control, I'm not talking about controlling you guys. I'm talking about controlling myself. To be able to communicate successfully to you, rather than just sort of spouting gibberish. And hopefully we can do that because we have that basic fundamental knowledge. It's there, and we don't need to think to draw upon it. It's there when we need it, right?
Learning it also in the classroom.
Oh, absolutely.
Tim, you mentioned about keeping it fresh, and even from the first time you teach it and teaching it for the 10th time, how do you can you, I think you said you were going to talk about it, but you didn't quite get.
Oh yeah, I didn't quite get to it. When I do those lectures, like I said, I get to the point where I've done 3 hours and 45 minutes of lecture, and I've got one more to go, and basically I do a little exercise. I kind of like psych myself up, and the thing is, the students leave and come in. I don't have time in between, so I really have to do sort of a meditation and say, okay, one more time, you're going to get focused, and I have to get myself excited about it. That's the whole thing. I have to say, okay, I like this lecture. I'm going to have fun. They're new students, and I kind of say, I'm going to be excited about it no matter what, and I just hope it doesn't come off like I'm being fake excited about it. But I think it's a conscious process, is what I'm trying to impart. You may have a different process, but it's really a conscious process for me to make sure that I can get myself excited about the same thing I've talked about for 4 hours again. It's work. It's just like playing the violin. It doesn't become unconscious until after years and years of experience. But like what Ellen was saying, after years of writing books on statistical modeling, that stuff instantly. You have access to it. So, hi Jen, and then. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So your metaphor of violins being sounding different, students being different, it's definitely something that I encounter. But as far as the actual performance is concerned during the lecture, you're still giving one lecture. You're having one chance. And part of what I've been looking at on a room full of 150 people, and you've got about 20 of them engaged.
I always say that when you kind of get into your lecture, and a lot of times I'll be lecturing, and then I'll pause and look out the students and see, blank faces or people diddling around or sleeping, and all of a sudden I sit there and I say, uh-oh, now I got to start working, because now it's my job to get everybody engaged, and the question is, well, how do you do that? One way that I've had success, and I have learned it from a lot of people, is you say the same thing 3 different ways, right? You present the same information. Once could be maybe the bare facts. Another could be through a case study. Another way could be through an illustration of something that happened in your life. You're giving them the same information. You're trying to engage different thought processes. And I think we have a lot of workshops on campus, or we should have more, on looking at different ways people learn. And Anne left, but Jamie's our co-student, and what Anne works on is, for example, how engineering students learn and how we can better train them. And there's people that are working very actively in those areas. So I like to read about it myself, and maybe that's something we can discuss and have more sort of workshops. There's one other.
Yeah, so when you're teaching a subject, very broad subject such as design course, you encourage open-minded discussion. But often, the discussion may go to direction where you may not familiar with that topic anymore. How would you, guide the student?
Mm-hmm.
And if you get to that situation, how would you summarize the student? Because they may not necessarily know the answer to that kind of topic.
Well, the first thing is that I think the worst thing any of us can do is try to fake it. Try to present something where we have no background knowledge, where we either read an article in the New York Times 3 months ago and we think we're remembering it, but we really don't have that basic knowledge that Ellen was talking about, that it's not inside us. And when students go there, I say, you know what, guys, you're beyond what I can teach you right now. Give me some time, I'll learn it, because this is one thing I think we can do very well, is learn new stuff in our areas. But I think you really have to say, right now I can't help you with that. And what I really like to do with the students, because it really gets them engaged, is say, we're going to learn this together. Come by my office, or you read a book on it or something, you come and teach me. And you tell me, and then we'll learn it together. Because then I think you get the students engaged and get yourself off the hook a little bit, because you're not stuck. Yeah. Sure.
Saying about attention, I was just rereading a wonderful book by Jerome Bruner, who's a psychologist at Harvard, and he has a very famous little book which was originally published in 1960 called The Process of Education, a brilliant book, and he talks about the fact that there are different kinds of attention. And sometimes when kids are sitting there in the room and they look very spaced out, there is a sort of a low level of attention. And then there's this kind of excited attention, where they're with you, which is, and those are there are different ways that people pay attention. And I think that it's a mistake to think that people are not, people are really not paying attention. But but it's a mistake to think that they're not. Sometimes you're amazed. And the kid who looks completely spaced out later on produced this amazing exam. So I think, and also when you're teaching, you can kind of play to different levels of attention. You can't have, if you're teaching for 3 hours, in a 2.5 hour, 3 hour seminar, you can't have everybody, attending like that all the time, but you can try for different, ways. I think you were really masterful at changing the kind of levels of attention. We were with you in different ways today, while you were playing the music, while you were showing things, while you were talking. I just think that getting us more involved might have
been more fun for you? Breaking my heart, Ellen. I was up till 4 a.m. preparing this lecture. Well, that's the problem. I did this.
That's part of it, though.
Yeah, this is something that I don't do all the time. So this is a brand new lecture for me. So I'm learning. Next time I do it, if there is a next time, yeah, we'll get more engagement, right? This really was a sort of first time. This is an experiment. This was fun for me to be able to do this, but.
But, I think that we were engaged even though we might not have been up and moving about for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. And, so, yeah, there are different levels of engagement, I suppose, too.
I think that's true. My daughter, I'm glad you said that, Ellen. My oldest daughter, Eliza, doesn't like to do anything until she gets it right. We go to piano class, and she'll sit, and I'll say, here, do this. And she doesn't want to do it because she's not going to get it right. And 2 days later, she'll go over to the piano and play it without having practiced it before. She's processing it in her head. She's observing, trying to figure out, trying to make sure she can get everything right, then she does it. It's kind of her style, and I'm getting used to that, whereas my other daughter doesn't mind the trial and error process at all. Mistake doesn't faze her one bit. So I hate making mistakes myself, but when I said, okay, I'm going to get up here in front of you guys and play the violin, I got to kind of get over being worried about mistakes because they're going to happen. So, but anyway, so I thank you again very much, and I think we all probably should move on. And thank you for your questions, and I really had a great time.